Teach Living Poets, it is a hashtag, but it's also more than a hashtag because it's what you do in your classroom and it's the way it's taught and the way the students get involved that makes it really meaningful. It's not just like we're learning about these poets who are alive, but we're also communicating with them, we're Skyping with them, and they're even coming to our classrooms.
I wasn't really a huge poet fan. I kind of viewed poetry as like this really kind of out of place, old kind of realm that I didn't really feel like I belonged in.
Getting into it, I thought poetry was all older, kind of like old white dudes, I guess. Not necessarily anybody I could really relate to, but when Miss Smith started bringing up all these modern poets that were teaching about themes and experiences that were relatable to my own experience, I was able to really connect to poetry in a way I never thought I was able to before.
And I feel like the topics of contemporary poetry from living poets are a lot more relatable. I can read poetry about things that I'm seeing in the news every day or things that I'm angry about, like social issues.
So just being introduced to these types of stories which through poetry allows you to empathize. That's kind of a gateway to all other forms of poetry. So like Shakespeare, Walt Whitman, all those other poets, like old poets that I never really felt connected to, I can now begin to appreciate a little bit more.
The idea of teaching living poets, poets that are alive today, writing poetry as we speak, that really opened up my eyes to how poetry is still relevant. When she actually had some real poets come and visit this school, that was mind-blowing for me. That was an amazing experience. I never thought I'd see the day when I was excited about poets visiting my school, but here I am talking about it, you know? It was.
I got the chance to look up a modern poet and read some of their poems and do little blog posts about them, analyzing their poetry, connecting it to the outside world. And we actually got to share those poems, or our blogs and those poems, with students all around the country.
What I liked about the poetry blogs is the ability to extensively look into these poets and their poems, but then also you get this constructive feedback from other high school students all across the country. And by responding and having this conversation about poetry, you learn more about what can be done with the medium.
We had the opportunity to Skype with living poet Clint Smith, who's a doctoral candidate at Harvard University, where it gives you the opportunity to actually see more and do more with his work, to know more about what he was thinking when he was writing a certain line, or to just relate more to the man himself behind the poetry.
I went to a poetry reading of his and a Q&A, and just being able to exist in the same room as someone you admire is insane to me.
Our English classes had the great opportunity to meet two actual living poets, Kaveh Akbar and R.A. Villanueva. And for me, as a person who never really, poetry was never something I gravitated towards. I kind of thought it was too complex and you could get too cheesy with it, but it was probably the coolest experience I've ever had in school.
Because they're kind of a big deal. I was kind of fangirling myself because I was really excited about it, which I think is the greatest thing about the Teach Living Poets hashtag, is because you learn that poets are normal people like me and you, and that kind of gets into the student's mind that's, hey, if they're normal people writing poetry, I'm a normal person, I can write poetry.
If you're good enough to make a living off of poetry and you come to my school because you want to teach me, I think that shows that because you're validated in the way that you teach, that validates me too.
And I really liked one way that Kaveh described poetry. He said that basically we just use words and they're kind of orbiting around a central nucleus or idea, but you never actually say the central idea, but you're kind of just orbiting it. It's kind of a good way to kind of organize your thoughts.
When Kaveh read his first poems, I would describe it as spine-chilling and very eccentric. I wasn't surprised how he approached the way he read his poems. I was like, wow, that's such a Kaveh thing to do. He was possessed by something, and I think that was pretty cool.
That poet visit meant everything to me. Getting to read his poetry and analyze the inner workings of it, that was just this little spot of brightness in this year, because it has been hard for me. I haven't really been super happy all year, and that his poetry makes me really, really happy. And finally getting to meet him and talk to him was amazing because before him, like, I didn't even have a favorite author, and he's my favorite author now. Like, he's created my favorite work of art. And I think that's a really, really valuable thing, like getting to present the man who like made me sort of fall in love with poetry. Like, that is an experience that I'm never ever gonna forget.
And they taught us techniques to write poetry, and it made me feel really confident in my writing.
You can't do that with Shakespeare, you know, you can do that with living poets.
I always liked English, but this increased my liking for English even more, to the point of me wanting to major in English.
Like, I got to meet Clint Smith, got to meet Kaveh Akbar, I got to meet R.A. Villanueva. We read all of their poetry in class, and I got to meet them and talk to them and listen to them talk about their poetry and their writing process, and that was awesome. I am signed up for a poetry class in college, though. My first semester is going to have a poetry class, and I definitely would not have signed up for that if not for reading a ton of poetry in class this year and getting to meet some of my favorite poets. That completely influenced my decision, and I'm really, really excited to have that experience.